Welcome, everybody. I'm joined by Matthew once again, and we are here to chat about retro format. So these are 5 tips for new and returning players to pick up in the retro format. So we're just going to go through sort of 5 suggestions. You're coming back in, you're forgetting things like, oh, should I not draw 13 cards in my hand for a specific reason? Or why should I always keep an extra force? So these are sort of 5 suggestions of just things to remember. And we're going to kind of go through some of the card interactions. You'll see a lot of these are red cards, which I think for new players can be a little daunting. So let's talk about a couple of these and why they're good. So what is our first tip here, Matthew?
Sure. Our first tip is always leave a force open. So it's very exciting in this game that you can draw multiple cards per turn, right? I'm coming from Magic and you draw one card per turn. And you have some force left open at the end of your turn. Why not draw one up? So there's a big difference between having like 1 force open and 0 force. So the number one way to lose this game is to be in a disastrous battle. So your opponent plays a bunch of stuff and beats you down unexpectedly. And the best defensive tool, which is in most decks, is Imperial and Rebel Barrier. So this is use a force, something that just came down, can't move or battle. So it's protection. And your opponent is going to be looking to see, do you have force up? And if not, you can't barrier. So you're much more vulnerable. So even if you don't have this card, it's really important to try to keep a force up to bluff it. Additionally, draw their fire and first strike show up a lot. This says deploy on your side of the table whenever battle is initiated. There's some retrieval, but also you, the opponent, have to pay 1 force to play and interrupt in battle. So even if you don't care about the barrier, all your tricks in combat are going to require force unexpectedly because the good players are not going to play this until they really need it. So to avoid getting surprised, you should always keep a force up to represent barrier and the ability to pay for first strike and draw their fire.
That's a really good. I mean, the big part of this game is also just bluffing. Like whenever I see 1 force in the opponent's force pile, I'm like, he probably has a rebel barrier, right? Like, and therefore I'm almost intimidated by the bluff there that he probably has it. Therefore, I should be careful how I deploy.
Right. So our second tip is again related to cards in the hand. So you should consider the virtual maximum hand size 12. So why is that? Well, it's another common card, Grimtash and Monarch. So this has 2 modes. If the opponent has 13 or more cards in hand, place all but 8 random selection in use pile. So if you draw above 12, even just like, I'll draw that 13th card, usually having the 13th card is much worse than having the 12th card in hand because you have the ability to have your hand disrupted at any time by your opponent. And the random selection is really brutal, right? Because that card that you were relying on for a trick or to come down or something like that could suddenly be gone. It also represents a big loss of time. So if you're spending your whole turn drawing up and your opponent makes you put your hand back, you've basically lost a turn there. So, consider, do you really need that 13th card or not? Or this is, again, related to the bluffing. Maybe your opponent doesn't have Grimtash or Monarch, but you need to kind of keep yourself at 12 or less unless you have a very good reason to do it so otherwise.
I mean, the other thing that why those cards are just good to run generally is it is so killer. Like I was playing a home hidden base deck with X-Wings, and the second part of that just like destroyed my deck.
Sure. Yeah. And this is if you have duplicates in your hand, the duplicates are lost. So
I had like 4 X-Wings and they played this and it basically just destroyed the entire deck's engine. So there's a really great second function for both Grimtash and Monarch. Right. So just generally good cards to run.
And because it's so versatile, you'll expect most of players to have this and need to be thinking about that for the deck construction for the lost part and then the hand size for the used part.
Perfect. And there's also that bluffing element. Like I just won't draw up to 12 and it's like the threat of a Monarch is so strong. And I'm like, nope, don't want to mess with that.
So my third tip, I don't have a card associated with it, is defenders have the advantage in battle. So relating to my first point where the easiest way to lose is to go into a bad battle. Remember, if you're attacking, maybe there's some characters lost on both sides, but your opponent has the opportunity to play reinforcements next, right? So if you get most characters lost and you just have a character too stranded, you have to consider what your opponent might play as reinforcements to fight you back. So, my third tip is stop picking bad battles, right? Because you don't know what's going to come from your opponent's hand, and you need to be looking at the number of cards in their hand. If they have 10, 12 cards or something like that, really only consider fighting a battle if you're sure it's going to be a crushing victory. Otherwise, you might get counterbeat and really come out worse on the exchange. Yeah.
Perfect. I think that's one thing everyone thinks, that like you can just pile down and sort of the attacker is going to have the advantage. But most of the time the defender does have the advantage because they're also going the following turn where they can then react, and you're sort of stranded out there. So you're putting yourself out there. So very good suggestion there. What is our fourth tip here?
Our fourth tip is either learn to track or at least watch your opponent for tracking. So I think you came out with a video recently on how to track. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So tracking is basically, instead of the destiny draws being random, you've strategically put cards back in your deck. So at a timely manner, you draw that. So I'll refer the viewers to the video that you put out on how to track. But the idea is you have like used interrupts with high destiny that you strategically play and then activate to make sure that the cards are not actually random. And it can go from full worthless cards with a high destiny to, a used card, which is pretty good, a little bit of a lower destiny, but still good to track. And, consider Omnibox and its light side equivalent, where it's good to track, right? A used 5, and also you can interrupt your opponent for tracking. So if you're not a tracking master yet, look at what your opponent is activating, right? So if your opponent can activate 15 force, but only chooses to activate 8, something bad is going to happen, right? Because there's something good on top there, and they're deliberately activating less than their full amount because something good is on top.
Yeah, and it's just a reminder that this game is won and lost with battle overflow damage, right? Like if you can, if you have 12 life force you have to lose on a battle, it's pretty close to good game, right? You're just never going to quite be able to recover because the, retrieval mechanics are there, but it's going to take you a long time to get it. So it can just be totally game ending at one really bad battle, and a huge battle destiny is a huge part of that.
Right. And my last tip is consider what would happen if your best character was excluded in battle. So here you are, your opponent has an Obi-Wan with a lightsaber or something like that, or some scrub, and you play Darth Vader and Grand Moff Tarkin, and then you play a lightsaber on Darth Vader, and things are great, right? Because Darth Vader can hit somebody with a lightsaber, and then maybe Grand Moff Tarkin can cancel the destiny, and you're really sure things are going to go great in battle. And then you fight and you lose the game. So what went wrong there? It might have been your best character got excluded, and you were just left with a subpar character. So there are numerous cards that can remove a character from battle unexpectedly, and you need to kind of be aware of these. The most common one are You Are Beaten and Clash of Sabers, which actually are very good and have several effects. I believe I talked about this in a previous video of mine, but what we're focusing on here is use 2 force to target a character present with your warrior with a lightsaber. It can even be a built-in lightsaber, right? So the EPP characters, they can't move or battle. So you initiate battle with your Darth Vader and your Tarkin. Your Vader gets excluded, and now you're just left with a Tarkin who maybe is going to get beat down. And these cards are pretty common in decks. I just brainstormed 3 more off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's others. So there's a lot of combat at docking bays. So
I got absolutely destroyed by Fallen Portal like 2 weeks ago. I just forgot.
It's really brutal. And, a lot of combat occurs at docking bays. Also, Jabba's palace specifically shows up a lot. So you fight, you lose 1 or maybe even more characters to something like Attract Destiny. And now you are left over with 1 scrub. The tides have turned and you've lost the game. Darkseid has several of these. Hidden weapons can make a character get immediately lost if your opponent has Boba Fett or Jango. Who's the other guy with the Mandalorian arbor?
Jodo Cast.
Jodo Cast, right.
Who's
Maybe
like a
Mango in the open format too.
yeah.
And Set for Stun, which has the ability to kind of at interrupt speed return your opponent's character to the hand. So this is, the game is very tricks related, and getting back to losing a battle is a good way to lose the game. You need to be thinking about what your opponent is doing. So if they have, 2 force unexpectedly up and a character with a lightsaber, you can still fight, but you need to have a contingency, maybe bring a third character, or maybe Darth Vader plus Tarkin is worse than just Darth Vader, right? Because then Tarkin won't be left by himself. So it's just kind of, knowing what is out there and knowing what your opponent could do to disrupt you.
Cool. So those are just 5 tips. We're probably going to do part 2. This is just some basic stuff. Love to hear what other people's tips might be. Matthew, thanks so much for joining us once
Thanks
again
for having me.
a little more of these videos and a little more flavor. If people want more, please let us know. We're happy to do more stuff like this. I'm kind of trying to gauge right now what people like. But we'll end there. And thanks for tuning in, everybody. And we'll see you next time.